NWSL is back in action this weekend with a full slate of important matchups, all with playoff ramifications. On Saturday, New Jersey, New York Gotham FC hosts the North Carolina Courage, with both clubs eyeing an important 3 points. Later on, the Chicago Red Stars take on the first-place Portland Thorns at home, with the Thorns positioned to clinch a playoff berth.
Here comes Sophia Smith. Murphy stays home. Smith, the touch, and Portland takes the lead.
On Sunday, the action kicks off in Kentucky as Racing Louisville FC faces off against the Houston Dash, with both clubs needing to make a move up the standings to reach the postseason. And in the district, the Washington Spirit know they need all 3 points as they host Kansas City. We wrap up the weekend with a good win in Tacoma as the surging OL Reign hosts the Orlando Pride at home. The Reign have catapulted up the standings, but face an Orlando club who are back at full strength.
Alex Morgan with a goal in her return to the NWSL.
Who will seize the moment with a little more than a month to go in the regular season? Tune into Paramount Plus and Twitch to find out.
So 5 matches to go in the regular season for each team as the race to the postseason is well and truly on. Let's take another look at what we've got coming up this weekend in the league. Gotham FC will welcome Paul Riley's North Carolina Courage to Red Bull Arena to kick off the action Saturday afternoon. Then the Thorns will be in Chicago Saturday night to take on the Red Stars, and 3 matches coming up Sunday. Racing Louisville will host the Dash. Kansas City will head to Washington to take on the Spirit, and to cap the action, the Reign will welcome the Pride to Tacoma. And welcome along to our NWSL previews here on CBS Sports HQ, presented by Zelle. Zelle is a great way to send money to friends and family wherever they bank in the US. Look for it in your banking app today. And here to look ahead to this weekend's slate, our former 2-time Olympic gold medalist Aly Wagner joins us now. Aly, it's always good to see you. We've got so much to discuss, but before we get into the league play, let's talk about the US women's national team who just beat Paraguay in 2 matches by a combined score of 17-0. I mean, we knew the US were the heavy favourites on paper, but were you expecting the scoreline to be this high, and what did you take away from those games?
You know, I wasn't shocked that the scoreline was that high. We knew this Paraguay team is really at the bottom of the CONMEBOL, and this was going to be their first test against the United States, the first time that they've actually played, a top-ranked opponent. And they're missing a lot of European players for Paraguay, so they weren't at full strength. And this U.S. team, even though they weren't at full strength, when you consider there was no Megan Rapinoe, no Lindsay Horan, no Sam Ewis, the list goes on, Alyssa Nair out. The young players really stepped up. That was the biggest takeaway that I had out of the 2-game set. You had Sophia Smith. She had her first career US goal. And then Andy Sullivan, a player that, we talked about the 6th position needing to be filled for the United States team. She had really good appearances in both the matches, and that's important. And then Alex Morgan, as you're getting a good look at some of the goals she netted, she picked up a hat trick in the last game out. So I think it was important for a lot of these players individually to put together good performances against Paraguay. It would have been a concern if they hadn't. And that would have been something that would have given Vlatko Andonovski pause in whether or not that he would bring them back into the fold, because by all accounts, the pressure was not tight. There was a lot of space, and so it afforded the U.S. players to be a bit more comfortable in what they were trying to execute out there. And the U.S., they looked fluid. They looked in sync. And again, this was about more individual performances, I think, for this team as it's trying to turn the page towards World Cup qualifying.
You're absolutely right, and a memorable night for many of them, but in particular Rose Lavelle, who had a goal and 3 assists in front of an electric crowd in her hometown. I mean, what a night that was. All right, let's talk about this weekend's action. Coming up Saturday, Gotham FC will host the Courage. This is 2 teams, Aly, that are both desperate to try and gain some momentum heading into the home stretch. So what are you expecting here?
Yeah, I mean, Gotham is really struggling. They're the only team in the NWSL that has not won since August. They are coming off a 7-game without picking up a W. North Carolina, as much as they're sitting in that 3rd position and they're always going to be a dangerous side, they still are struggling to figure out how they are going to play, how they're going to break down their opposition, and more importantly, find the back of the net. They are now 3 games without scoring, and that is really a cause of concern for Paul Riley. You've got Lynn Williams, you've got Jess McDonald, you have Amy Rodriguez, you have Dabinia, a player that for a long time has been considered one of the top players in the world, and she's underperforming. So big questions for Paul Riley and how we can get this team flowing again. In the game against Portland, the last time out where they lost 1-0, their first time ever, by the way, that Portland picked up a win in Salem Stadium in North Carolina. That game, they did have opportunities to find the back of the net. They just didn't do it. So their strikers are underperforming. Their midfield's underperforming. The only thing that really is going well for North Carolina, which is so shocking to say because, again, they're sitting in 3rd place, is Casey Murphy in net. She's been outstanding, and the back line has started to gel. They still lead the NWSL with only conceding 10 goals. Having said that, they're coming up against a Gotham team that has a hungry Carly Lloyd. We know that she wants to get this team into the playoffs. Both her and Ifeoma have not scored in the last couple of games. The important part is we saw this kind of partnership start to look like it was going to gel really nicely when Carly came back from the Olympics. They have been out of sorts, out of sync since Ifeoma has moved into a wider position. I'm curious to see if that is adjusted moving forward, and you can get those 2 players linked up centrally. I think that would serve some purpose for them to get this Gotham team back on the right track and into the playoff hunt. Having said that, this is a Gotham team that is in striking distance, so if they can get on a run and you get that right side of Cabrice Dydasco where they really like to generate their attack from up against the left side of North Carolina. They do a lot of their build out that side. Pickett gets high. If they can take advantage of that with Gotham, I think this could be a game that Gotham turns things around.
You're absolutely right. Both teams looking to turn things around. Gotham winless in their last 7, North Carolina winless in their last 3. So a huge game coming up from Red Bull Arena. Elsewhere, the Red Stars host one team that's had no problem with form this season. That is the league-leading Portland Thorns, who are 6 points clear at the top. They've just been so consistently good all season, Ali. So it's never too early to look ahead. Do you see the Thorns winning it all this year?
I think they're absolutely a lead contender in that category. I would say that you could put them, you could put Orlando Pride, and you put OL Reign in that category. The last time out with Portland when they faced Chicago, it was a drubbing. They knocked in 5 goals. One of them was an own goal by Chicago, but they beat them 5-0. And there is such a strong history of Portland getting results against Chicago, and I don't see that changing this time out. Sophia Smith is going to be in really good place mentally. She's been outstanding in club play. She's in that golden boot race with 6 goals. As we said earlier, she picked up her first goal with the U.S. women's national team. So there's going to be a lot of confidence within this young player, but she also may get a bit of a respite and maybe more space because Simone Charlie is supposed to be back. She was supposed to be back for that North Carolina game, but there was an injury or a little bit of a nagging situation for her that didn't allow her to make that trip out to North Carolina. Mark Parsons fully anticipates her inclusion in this game, and that could be another boost and threat for this Portland Thorns team, as you said, Poppy. It is absolutely the lead contender to go the distance, not only in the Shield, but ultimately come playoff time. So I don't expect them to have a hiccup here against Chicago. The only way that I see this game going in Chicago's favor is at the feet of Mallory Pugh. She also had strong performances these past few games for the U.S. women's national team, had 3 assists in that opening game. She was the set piece taker. And I think with the Chicago team, she does fulfill that role, but she's also the player that is drawing a lot of these fouls. And if you look at the way Portland plays, they want to press, they want to win the ball high. Chicago is the second fastest in the NWSL in terms of progressing towards the goal, and that's largely because of Mallory Pugh. She's been so impactful, and I think if they can create some moments where they do break that initial pressure against Portland and get Mallory Pugh isolated against Angela Salem sliding over, that absolutely benefits Chicago because of the agility that Mallory Pugh has versus Salem. And I think they could draw some fouls in dangerous areas. And that could be a place that Chicago looks to take advantage of Portland Thorns. Otherwise, this Portland defense has been outstanding. It's been team defending. But if they do look vulnerable, and we saw it against North Carolina, it is in transition. And Chicago does have a player in Mallory Pugh that can make them pay.
What a great stat that was, Aly, and you're absolutely right. So good to see Mallory Pugh finding her stride again. So there are 2 matches on Saturday. Coming up on Sunday, Racing Louisville will host the Dash. This is 2 teams that have really struggled in terms of points as of late. However, the results, though, for both these teams seem to be really close, low-scoring affairs. So how are you expecting this one to unfold?
Yeah, you're right. The series history between these 2 sides tied, both picking up a win against each other, both at home, 1-0 wins at that. So I do think this could be another tight match. What Louisville has to get right is that they've had no clean sheets in the last 11, and that's a big problem for them because the Dash team has Rachel Daly, who's really started to click and find her form since returning from the Olympics. She's scored 3 goals in her last 4 games, actually the last 3 goals for the Dash. So she is going to be a key player that Louisville has to slow down, have to stop. But on the flip side, if Louisville wants to make a push for playoffs, they've got to get Ebony Salmon back clicking and finding form. She was away with the English national team. Hopefully that change of scenery will shift things for her mentally because they just have not been able to get her in really good positions that she can find herself in that 18-yard box and capitalizing on opportunities. It's all really come down to McCaskill and the energy that she has, the box-to-box ability that she has that has provided some of that thrust for Louisville. And I think that's just too much to ask of her to also provide that finishing touch. So they've got to get Salmon going. And on the flip side, you're seeing a good look at some of the goals that Daly has scored since returning from the Olympics. This is the key play for them. We've talked about it earlier, Poppy. They have to get results if they are going to make a playoff push. You know, James Clarkson has said they fancy their side against any of the teams in the league once playoffs roll around, but they just have to get themselves into a situation where they get a few wins under their belt because the stretch gets really challenging for them. They've got to get a result here. If they don't, they're in a difficult situation. We've seen them go up on teams and they can't hold their lead. They've been up on teams 10 times. Only 50% of the time are they picking up the result in those matches. That's not a good stat. So they've got to learn to control the game. And as much as they're not a possession team, try to find a way to control the opposition out of possession, which used to be a skill set for them. Hasn't been the case this year.
So 2 teams looking to work their way up there. At the bottom of the table, Kansas City will head to Washington to take on the Spirit. Washington is in the last playoff place as it stands, but Kansas City, I mean, they're really out of all playoff hope at this point. So, Aly, from a player's perspective, how is it when one of these teams is desperately fighting for the postseason and the other team maybe just fighting for roster positions for next season? What are you expecting in this one?
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, I think the mentality approach for both these sides is incredibly different. When you look at this Kansas City team, I think their manager has to be thinking about next season and figuring out which players he wants to retain moving forward, what style of play fits for him, and how they actually want to implement that in the NWSL. It's really funny that this team is out of reach, it seems, for those playoffs. When you talk to most of the managers within the league, Kansas City has gotten so much better, and they actually think this is one of the teams they don't want to face. And you wouldn't think that based on results, based on points. This is a team that hasn't scored in their last 2. So it'll be interesting to see if, as Kansas City being a team that actually has nothing to lose in terms of getting results, but individually have something to prove. And sometimes that can lead to a disjointed performance and ultimately, fall in the lap of this Washington team that, by the way, has not played in 28 days. They've given 2 of their opponents 3-0 wins because they weren't able to field a team just based on COVID situations. So this is the Washington Spirit team that is really in a precarious position, especially with such young players. They no longer have their manager, as you know, and now by default, they've conceded two games, 3-0, without even getting these players out on the pitch. So I think they are going to look to Andy Sullivan. As much as she is a young player, this is a player that is a leader for that team. speaking with Carly Lloyd heading into the last U.S. Women's National Team match, she said, Andy Sullivan is a player that I think can lead this U.S. team going forward. That says a ton because the U.S. National Team is a different caliber, of course, than the NWSL. So we know what kind of qualities she has to be that person for this Washington Spirit team. And they're going to have to lean on her because they do have the young squad of Rodman, Sanchez. And those are two players that actually had good performances against this Kansas City team the last time they faced off. Both netted. Rodman had the late goal winner. And so I think they're going to be confident. I think this is hopefully a Washington Spirit team that did a lot of training in that long layoff period where they didn't have any full matches. So a cause for concern can be match fitness, but potentially with their interim manager, they could be in a situation where they're able to get on the same page, understand what he's going to be asking of those individuals in their specific roles. And now against a Kansas City team going out and really trying to put that into effect against a side that, as you said, Poppy, is not fighting for much.
Yeah, nothing more difficult than playing a team with nothing to lose, is there? Well, to conclude the action, the Red Hot Rain, they'll host the Pride. OL comfortably sitting in second place. I mean, what's been the biggest change for them, Ali, in terms of this second half of the season that's just allowed them to have so much success as of late?
I think it's the internationals that they brought in and finally settling into the pace of the NWSL, the transition game, the intensity of the press. I really think these are players, they're so sophisticated, and it just was a matter of time before they were going to start to understand what the demands were within this NWSL league. But this is really going to be the golden boot race. You've got Sydney Leroux sitting at the top with 8 goals. You've got Bethany Balser on the other side sitting with 8 goals. So this is just the golden boot game to me. And I think when you look at this OL Reign team, they are the team that can contend with Portland Thorns, or I would put them up there as being the team that would be able to push the Thorns the most come playoff time. And Orlando is that other team that is kind of sitting on the periphery of that. So this is a massive matchup. And last time these two faced off, 2-0 win for OL Reign. And look, this Orlando side has not been held scoreless in 7, but the last time they were, it was in that match. So it'll be interesting to see. You've now got Alex Morgan back in. She had that hat trick with the U.S. Women's National Team, so she's finding her form again. She's going to have a lot of confidence coming in. Sydney Leroux and Marta, all those 3 players scored in their last game. That bodes incredibly well for Orlando. How do you slow that down if you're OL Reign? I think OL Reign is going to like their chances on their home pitch because it's a smaller field. If you look at the way Orlando plays, they like to have those runners in behind. They like to be able to stretch you. That just isn't plausible on this really small baseball field that OL Reign calls home. So ultimately, I think the advantage goes to this OL Reign team. They're going to be getting Megan Rapinoe back, is my understanding, from Coach Laura Harvey. She had taken a knock, and this is a player that's sitting on 5 goals, has a ton of assists, and as we know, is really capable of creating special moments 1v1, especially in those wide areas where Orlando seems to be more susceptible. So I give the nod to OL Reign and continue to see Portland Thorns and OL at the top of the table. And
I know, Ali, you said just off camera, this is the one for you that you're going to be watching this weekend. We love a golden boot game, don't we? Well, it is tight in the table, though. A win for Orlando would put them just 1 point behind OL, so a massive match awaits in Tacoma. Ali, brilliant insight as always. Thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy all the matches, but especially that one.
Thanks, Poppy.
And here is a reminder of what we've got on tap. It all gets started Saturday night at Red Bull Arena as Gotham host the Courage. The Red Stars and the Thorns will cap Saturday's action. Then a trio of matches coming up Sunday. Houston away to play Louisville. Kansas City there on the road to face the Spirit. And will OL keep their good form going? Well, we will see Sunday night at 7 p.m. when they host the Pride.